Hello everyone, this is Hydra intermediate tutorial, first video, and in this video I want to talk about feedback, which I know everyone's excited about. But why is it intermediate? Because we finished beginner's tutorial, and in the beginner's tutorial the idea was to go through, well, maybe not all, but most of the functions in the API page, and we kind of finished doing this. And now intermediate doesn't mean that it's like we're doing like rocket science. We just like do things, but basically building on top of what we looked into in the beginner's tutorial. Which means that if you're already familiar with like Hydra, like the functions and the basic ideas of like layering and modulating and using the colors, geometry, and so on, then it's all good. But if you haven't, I know feedback, for example, is like a really interesting topic, but before jumping into this, you probably want to look into the API page or my previous tutorials to catch up. But also, like, it's not like advanced tutorials, so if you follow those videos, I hope that you will get the idea of like what I'm talking in this video. So let's jump in, and I'm gonna just make myself small. And okay, last time I moved myself here, but I'll just move myself to the right corner again. And now the big difference between what we have done in the previous videos and what we're gonna do today is that feedback is not a function. So what we did in the past, we're like using different functions and combining them. And I talked about this like kind of sandwich. So we have the source, like OSC or webcam, and then we have stuff inside, which can be like color, geometry, or it can be like blending, layering, modulation. But then we finish it with the out function, which basically outputs to the buffer, which can be O0 or O1, O2, whatever. So let's just like start with the basic showing myself inside the Hydra page editor. And probably I don't need to explain this anymore, but we have the source, which is S0, which is a camera, and the basic way, the most basic way is to plug it into out so that it will be shown. If you do it just this, it will not be shown, which is actually quite important in this topic today, because now we have to be a little bit careful with careful or a bit more aware of what this out is. I think I briefly mentioned that by default it's outputting to O0, and we also have O1, O2, O3, and we can also use this render function. So if you just like evaluate it, then it will make this grid, and it's actually showing O1, O2, O3 in the three other corners in the grid. And this is not just for like debugging purpose. I mean, it's quite useful for debugging. For example, if you want to use like Voronoi and output it to O1, then you have it here. And you know, I'm just like hinting that I'm going to use blend later, but you can use blend source O1 so that now this Voronoi, instead of using like Voronoi as a blending source with my webcam image, I can use source O1 so that it's going to be blended with source S0. And as you saw in blending video, you can use the second parameter as something to kind of amplify which part, like is it Voronoi I want to amplify, which is what is inside blend, the first parameter, or is it what's preceding, which is the source S0. Then like if I do like 0, then it's completely source S0. If it's like 1, then it's completely Voronoi, which is source O1, and such. Like you can scale it between 0 and 1. So it's just like a slider. So that's the function of the how this O0, O1, O2, O3 works. And if you just want to show O0, then you have to use render with this argument O0, and you can see this full screen again. So you have O0, O1, O2, O3, and that's not just about like kind of having this like debugging or plugging into another one, but also when we talk about feedback, we are actually going to use this O0 as a source. So I don't know if this makes sense, but now the sandwich, we had like a different band for the top and the bottom, but now we're like trying to make this kind of infinite sandwich so that the bottom part, which is out O0, that kind of goes back to the top band, which is the source S0. Well, let's just try and what it does. Let's see what it's gonna do. And I'll just like keep this blend not in place anymore. Okay, so let's just keep it simple. So I just go back to whatever that was source S0 out, and what happens if I put O0 as a source and output it to O0. Oops, I should have to Control Enter or Control Shift Enter. And now this is not the browser that's stuck or frozen, but it's actually it's correct behavior. If you are following along, you will probably see your browser kind of frozen as well, but you can see that editor is still up. This is because what is output to O0, now we're like taking it and using as a source. So what is rendered, what is on the screen is going to be used as a source, and now we're putting it back to the render and again and again and again. I don't know if that makes sense, but this starts to make sense, for example, that this is still like alive if you do like color 100, which is like a red color filter. And if you do it, then okay, it still works. It's just frozen and it still works. And if you do, for example, I don't know, but the difference now is that if we had S0 and if you take this color away, it should show normal color me, but it's not doing it anymore because we're only taking this red Naoto picture back to O0, source O0. So it's not going to be changed. And then more interesting thing we can do is what if we do like 0.99. It's like quite arbitrary, but I chose it carefully. So if you do like this and evaluate it, then it will fade away because what it's doing is it's taking O0 back to source O0 and taking this like multiplying like color filter, so reducing a little bit and then feed it into output to O0, taking it to source O0, reducing the color a little bit, and this just continues and continues and continues, which is the feedback. And now you see that it kind of fade away. I mean, it's not completely black. If you want to make it completely black, we can do like 0 or maybe a bit harsher. This will go black. And again, if you take this color out, color away, then you don't see myself again because now we only have this like black canvas, and we're just taking this black canvas back to source, which is normal behavior. I'm not seeing it again. If I want to revive myself, I just have to put it back to this where we started. Is this useful? As it is, maybe not so much. It might be useful for like, I don't know, if you are ending the show, maybe you want to do like color. Well, it's a little bit cumbersome, but you have to do it 3 times if you want to do this, like have the same effect, well, visual effect with RGB channels, not just red. Then if you do this, then it will fade away, which may be like an interesting way of finishing a show. So this can be useful, but probably this is not the feedback that you were anticipating. So let's see what we can do. And if you think about it, the problem with this way of doing it's kind of like frozen the frame, and we're just like having this infinite sandwich, but actually the sandwich still needs some like new feed. So we're like feedback, but like we have to feed something, some new contents. It can be S0, it can be, I don't know, Voronoi, it can be OSC or whatever. That has some fresh ingredients have to come. Otherwise it will just like like frozen sandwich or stale sandwich, which we don't want. Or I mean, in some cases we might want, but when we end the show, for example. But in this case, we don't really want to like finish it like this. We just want to like keep it going, and for that we need some fresh ingredients or fresh sauce. I don't know, like you can like think about injecting the I don't know, ketchup bottle and squeezing it little by little to have a bit of new content in there. Whatever metaphor. We can think about so we did blend earlier. What if we blend in, let's say, webcam, so that now it's a little like it's simple, but it's quite complex structure. I can add some new lines here. So what it does is that we're taking O0. Well, let's evaluate first. I'll do Control-Shift-Enter, and it's actually not doing much. Like you don't see like anything particularly like different from before, but it is using source O0, which is coming from the image, that canvas that you are seeing, and blending it with the fresh ingredient, which is the source S0, and outputting. Now, you remember that blend has, well, I just explained, a second parameter, which is the number, and by default it's 0.5, but what if we make it closer to source O0, which is the previous frame, which is the one that is responsible for feedback. Let's go closer to it. Not so much, not really. Oh, because it's not evaluating, sorry. I have to do Control-Shift-Enter. So even with like 0.3, you start to see like a little bit like this motion blur kind of thing. It's not exactly motion blur, but and now like it's more like apparent. And then like 0.1, now it's quite blurry. Again, if you do 0, then it will just like get frozen. So you probably want like something closer to 0, but not exactly. Oh, this is doing some weird thing. So this was not what was expected. Okay, so this is good. So now like I'm kind of almost like drawing with the After Effects on the screen or the canvas. So that's like with 0.05 blending. So this means that it's kind of amplifying or like prioritizing source O0 quite a lot, but also you're adding a bit of source S0 every frame, and we're making feedback. Basically, that's that. So, I mean, by feedback we mean that we're using the previous frame to do something in the current frame, so that it's constantly like the previous frame is getting in on the stage, like back again, and we're kind of blending it. And because in the past we were just like using source S0 or OSC, whatever, that is like always fresh, and adding geometry, color, blending, layer, modulate. We did some complex stuff, but it's always like rendering on the spot. It's not dependent on what was drawn before, but now it is dependent on what is drawn before. So that is feedback. So congratulations, you made it. But I know that you know that there is like much more than this. And for example, so now we have to kind of start thinking like very separately on the first part, which is the O0, and the second part, which is S0. They behave quite differently. So, but this one is quite easy to work with. Like we can just like apply whatever we learned before. And for example, if you do this, then it will just take red channel. Or we can do like our favorite colorama and then maybe amplify a bit. No, this way. So now my color is colorama is added, but then we're doing the same feedback. Basically, it's kind of like making this blurry after effect on the canvas. So like for example, I can rotate myself, but then again it's not really changing the, how to say, the property of the feedback itself. And I don't know, I can do like modulate with noise or whatever, but then it's a little bit like, it becomes like a little bit almost like cosmetic in a way that, well, it is like my webcam feed is changing in some ways, but again, it's not affecting the feedback, the property of the feedback, how the feedback behaves. And actually we can control a little bit more how feedback happens. But before that, let's also like look into like, what if we do the same structure of this like squeezing ketchup bit by bit. It doesn't have to be webcam. It can be like, for example, OSC. Although I don't know if this is like particularly interesting. It's like very like even like blurry OSC. I love OSC, but I don't find this one particularly interesting. Maybe Voronoi is. This is a little bit more interesting. I mean, the transition part is actually quite interesting. That how OSC blends still like kind of burned into Voronoi, and now like because Voronoi has this like rotation kind of movement, it's kind of working nicely with this feedback that we made. So it can be noise. Well, noise acts a little bit in a funny way because it has a negative value. Well, maybe yes and no. It has like weird, there's some weird lines you see. That's because noise is not just outputting 0 to 1, but it's outputting -1 to 1, and it has like some weird properties. But yeah, like maybe so far like Voronoi is the favorite. What we can see is that if you have like this kind of harsh lines, it kind of works well with blending. I mean, feedback using the blend. Well, I'm using blending for now. I mean, the blend function for now because it's the easiest way to demonstrate feedback, and I think that's like a very first step, and it's kind of something that you won't fail easily with this feedback with the blend, but it's not the only way to make feedback. We're going to look into different ways to make feedback in the future videos, but for today we stick to this like very basic form of feedback because I think it's easy, and also like again, like you can't really make things go like flickering and go crazy in this way of working with feedback. Now, okay, maybe like one observation is that these like harsh lines actually work quite well. So what if you use source S0 and let's say like thresh. So I'm thresholded, but yeah, maybe. So now it's not so like it has this like blurriness still, but you can see that the after effects are a little bit more visible. It depends. Also, it depends on your camera and your environment, but it may be quite interesting to explore like this. So that's something. That's how you can work with blend and to use to make feedback. Now, okay, maybe I keep this thresh thing because I kind of like it. Now, the other way to affect, well, actually we're not really affecting the feedback, and the other part that we haven't really touched is this here, source 0, and we can also do things to it. And just like first we saw like the color, if you do like color 100, that's red filter. So this is like still okay. This is not really affecting feedback. But if we use something like this fading thing that we looked into at first, we can do something like this, and well, it's not really doing anything. What if we do like 0.9? Yeah, well, it's just like everything got quite dark, so maybe it's not really interesting. What if, okay, maybe because of the thresh? I don't know. Yeah, but it's still like everything is just dark. And this is not really interesting. Well, okay, so this is not really successful, but we can do something like colorama. And this is this is a little bit dangerous territory we're getting into because I never really made this like caution in the video, but if you're like photosensitive, like to like epilepsy or something, if you have, you might be like, you might want to like be very careful, or maybe not to proceed, which is kind of a bit scary. But the thing is that it might start to, you know, flicker and so on. And I said with blending, it's like, it's a bit safer, but it might happen. And with this colorama, with default, even with the default value, it might get really crazy. I can try like 0.01, and let's see what's gonna happen. And you can see that it's really making this quite, yeah, like, I don't want to say like trippy, but it's kind of trippy, that it's going like really from one color to another, like changing the hue all the time. It's not flickering, so I would say this is still kind of safe. But it's very different from like how we saw just having, you know, this, if we just plug this same function to, instead of source O0 here, if we put it source S0 here, then you see like this is like almost nothing. Like some parts of my clothes and tip of my nose is like blue. It's a little bit changing the color, but it's not never like harsh like visual effect. But if we do it the same thing inside like directly to O0, which is like affecting the feedback, how the feedback behaves. So this side, it changes quite a lot how visually, what visual result it produces. And that's why like feedback is super interesting, but at the same time you want to be careful, not just because of, you know, if you're photosensitive or not, but it might get like really out of control, even with this blend function. With other functions we will look into later, it might go really wild. So yeah, so that's just like a little thing that I wanted to mention. So I might want to like even make it even smaller, 0.003, maybe then you don't really see anything anymore. But still, this is actually adding something quite a lot to the clothes. Actually, this is making kind of, in a way, it's like oscillation, which is quite interesting, I think. Now, so yeah, so you want to like work, not necessarily like small numbers. This is also the interesting thing. For example, like if you think about geometry, or like, yeah, like if you looked into like color, like we did, like this, like in this case, like for colorama, we wanted like very small number, close to 0. But for color, it's not like you want to work with like small number, but you want to keep it close to, well, actually I can try like this, for example, that is already like making it quite reddish. So something that is like close to 1. For example, like scale is a good example. If you look into like scale, because scale, like if you think about scaling, like 1 is like neutral. Now it's like no change. But if you want to like scale it a little bit bigger, if you think about like 1.1 is not like massive scaling up, but if you do it like this, then it will go really crazy. Wow, it was like quite surprise effect. And now it's still like making my mouth really big. Maybe I should have made a content warning. But for example, if I do like 0.01, you can see this like really crazy visual result that's happening, that it's like making a ripple from myself and expanding even with this 1.01, which is like visually, like if you do it on S1 source S0 here, like you don't see any noticeable difference from scale 1. But if you do it inside the feedback, then it will make this crazy, well, okay, I really have to improve my vocabulary from like crazy or trippy, but this kind of ripple kind of, or like kind of smoky almost visual effect with scale 1.01. And it's the same with, for example, like scroll, I don't know, scroll X. Again, don't make it too big. In like with scroll X, always think about, you know, what would be neutral. So if you do scroll X0, it will not do anything. well, it's actually not true, but it will not do anything, let's say. And we just like move it slightly from there, 0.01, and it's actually already, this is like, I said slightly, and it's like going like really crazy. So 0.003 is actually, wow, it's really interesting how, and I can also move with the feedback, and it makes a really interesting illusion. Same with scroll Y, and so on. So that's something, that's like an easy way to like explore feedback. So if you're working with source O0 directly to manipulate the feedback, then just try to find what is not going to affect anything. Or, you know, it can be like geometry or color. Let's pick another one, like rotate. Then rotate, like what if you think about what is not going to make any change to rotate, which is rotate 0, right? If you do this, there's no change. So just move slightly, very slightly, and this is already doing some feedback, 0.003. And if you can imagine, if it's like 0.1, then it will go like really fast. I was trying something earlier, and I think I did 0.1 rotate, and it was like spinning super fast. Maybe I can go a little bit more like this. And then this is like already like I'm in this swirl world. What else? What, for example, like contrast. It's something that is like neutral, let's say, when it's like 1, right? So there's no change. And if I want to like enhance the contrast, probably I want to do something like 1.01. Well, with the color, it can be a little bit harsher, but if you go like contrast 2, then it will like go really wild. What else do we have here? For example, like modulate is also possible. Like modulate noise. Like remember, like I prefer smaller number. And again, you don't want to do it like 0.1 like default. Like I know that this was like enough. I mean, this was like more than enough for normal cases. But for feedback, we want to start with like, okay, like let's start with 0. So we know that nothing's going to happen. And from there, we add a tiny bit. And this is already doing a lot of things in here. And it's also interesting that how it looks is very different from, like with the feedback, it's quite different from how you modulate, like normally what modulate does, right? Modulate is like doing some kind of thing that is like distorting the image, but now it's more like movement. You can see that is kind of, yeah, like playing with like watercolor almost. I can go a little bit more, and then this is like going quite wild. So this is like very basic way of working with feedback, and I can, well, with this very basic syntax of having source O0, blend, source S0, and some small number output. This will all, like, you can already, like, with the tools you have, the functions we visited, you can do a lot of things, like different combinations. But remember that if you are manipulating source O0, which comes from the previous buffer, make sure that you don't put, not always like big number. It can be like, it can be like closer to 0, but also it can be closer to 1. So just think about what will not affect anything. Again, like if it's scale, what will not affect is scale 1. This is not going to change anything because multiplying by 1 doesn't change anything. And then I can also make it shrink, but then always stick to like something close to 1. And this is already doing something. So yeah, that's the very basic lesson. But I guess it's really complex. There's a lot that you can explore. You can also use different sources, and you can chain different functions. It's, you know, for demonstration I made it simple, but you can always manipulate O0 and S0 at the same time with different functions and so on. So if you create something interesting, or if you find something interesting, just share with us on the comment down below, or you can post it in the different communities and Facebook, Discord, and so on. Please do so. And if you have questions, please ask around, or I have my email address now on my bio, or you can like comment down below so that I can check what kind of questions you have. I can answer it directly, or I might record another video to address that. Or if you have like suggestions or wishes and so on, I can also read that through comments or email or Mastodon or whatever. So please do so. I really love to hear from you. That's like motivation to keep this running. I'm really happy that now I finished the beginner's tutorial and doing this another series of Hydra tutorials, and that's like thanks to you all for watching and supporting me. So please like the video, subscribe, don't forget. And in the next video, I will try to switch the topic a little bit. It's going to be layer. I know that we looked into layer in the beginner's tutorial, but we'll find different patterns that you can use so that after looking into layers, we can come back to feedback to make a little bit more different ways of working with feedback. So it's not, this is like kind of, today the whole thing was a little bit blurry that we made, which is interesting for some of you, but you might want also like different ways of making feedback. Can be like more like harsh noise, I don't know, some kind of harsh like visual representation. So for those making different representations, we have to look into layers first, and then we come back to feedback, and that one can like go like really like flicker, or can have like really like edges in the image, which can be like really interesting. So stay tuned, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.